going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Going the Distance podcast presented by ImmaculateSports.com. Twitter's at ImacSports.
Instagram is also at ImacSports.
TikTok, YouTube, Immaculate Sports. It's episode 228. Championship week is here for the NFL. Really excited about that. And just overall, trying to put a close to this NFL season. We're going to start to begin that process a little bit after we talk about our conference championship picks. And, of course, the Natty, the college football playoff national championship. Last night, Ohio State wins it. Not too difficult for them, 34-23. And may not have been the greatest matchup, but I'm glad that Notre Dame was competitive at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's true. As someone who bet on Ohio State minus 8.5, it got a little scary there towards the end. And then once I saw him go deep for Jeremiah Smith, it all kind of healed my doubts that I had about my bet. They kicked the field goal, ended up covering, and won by 11, of course. But what Skyler alluded to earlier with closing out the season, we're going to go over top 10 QBs, running backs, and wide receivers of the season. We might do some more position groups as the year goes on. But it's one of those weeks where you just don't have a ton of stuff to talk about, unfortunately, because we do have the conference championship games. And while, those games are exciting and we'll definitely talk about them, that's not the entire episode that we could do. So with MLB, being what it is right now, we'll talk about MLB here in a minute. We have to find some other things over these next couple of weeks. So we're in the dog days of winter. We're both wearing beanies. People can't see that, but
both gray.
We're cozied up. Yeah. But I'll let you go first with the with your opener, and I'll get into mine because mine's a bit more of a sour note.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was hoping that my opener was going to be Aaron Glenn, hired by the Jets with a new GM, all locked up and ready to go before he meets with the Saints. But unfortunately, it sounds like that's not going to be the case, whether he is hired by the Jets or the Saints. Once again, it's going to happen right after we do the podcast today, tomorrow, next week. So I'm going to go with something that is also pretty happy. I try to go opposite of Kyle. 5 new members of the Baseball Hall of Fame, 3 of them on the BBWAA, Baseball Writers of America. That's Ichiro Suzuki on the first year. Missed unanimous by 1 vote. Come on, guys. Probably the same guy who did Jeter dirty. I'm sure the guy who didn't vote for Griffey is going to be on that list if you dig hard enough. Just maybe a really upset Boston sports writer somewhere. We also have CC Sabathia from Northern California, gets in on the first ballot, one of the best lefties of all time at 87% of the vote. And finally, Billy Wagner, maybe the greatest left-handed reliever of all time. Finally in, took a little long, but hey, it wasn't the 10th year, right? So 83% will take it. A couple of guys who just miss out, we'll probably see Carlos Beltran get in next year, just a 70%, not too far off here. And we've talked about him before on here. It's not about the player. It's more about the off-field stuff. And he didn't really hurt anyone. So you would imagine he gets into the Hall of Fame eventually. Andrew Jones is going to be a real close one. Not a lot of movement, right? 66% again. Another guy, maybe if he played 15 years later, he'd be a slam dunk Hall of Famer, but didn't quite have the batting average of his peers of this era. And then 2 other guys with massive jumps, right? Chase Utley up to 40% in his second year. Andy Pettit up to 30%. Andy Pettit's a little later on, but we have guys like John Lester, Cole Hamels coming up on the ballot. If you start comparing Andy Pettit to those guys, obviously Andy Pettit played much longer. Maybe we'll reopen the conversation. And how about first-year guy Felix Hernandez, who we both talked about about a month or 2 ago when we broke down the ballot. Great start, 21% for Felix Hernandez. That's you can't do much more than that as a starting pitcher, right? So good to see. Also, it was Dick Allen and I'm forgetting the other one from the committee vote.
I wasn't sure. I didn't see those.
Well, Kyle, I will find it and we will talk about it before we move on. But you can go ahead and do your opener right now. But yeah, Baseball Hall of Fame is always cool.
Yeah, and I'll hit on that too before I get into what I wanted to talk about. Obviously, Billy Wagner a bit older than Ichiro and CC Sabathia, so we didn't really get to experience his greatness in the live sense of it. Obviously, we see like his MLB The Show cards that come out year to year, and we have a bit more familiarity with that. than we do of his actual play and watching it. But with CC Sabathia and Ichiro Suzuki, these were superstars during our, watching of baseball. They weren't just, there when we were growing up. They were there for us, 10 years ago when we, really became baseball fans. And those two names, of course, are kind of synonymous with the 2010s and even before that in the 2000s as well, too. So good to see those guys get in. I don't understand how there was one guy who just didn't vote for Ichiro. I also don't understand how, like Ken Griffey Jr. didn't get in unanimously, or Cal Ripken Jr. didn't get in unanimously. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. But that's for another day. What I wanted to talk about is some of the discourse I've been seeing practically for a couple years now with the Dodgers and stuff online about people getting mad at the Dodgers for spending money and, making the game unfair and all this stuff. Unfair isn't a possibility in baseball. It's just never been that way. We haven't seen a repeat winner in the 2000s ever since the Yankees did it in 02, 03 or whatever year it was. Like, it hasn't happened in over 20 years. Just because you are paying the most money does not mean that you're going to win the World Series. I saw TikTok actually from Chris Rose, who was talking about with Trevor Plouffe that the fact that only 6 teams that had the number 1 record during the regular season went up to win the World Series that year in the 2000s. It's only happened 6 times out of 24, 25 years. So by no means is it over by the Dodgers signing all these people. And I see all the people giving the players shit for signing with the Dodgers, like Roki Sasaki. Why wouldn't he sign for the Dodgers? If you are going to have the option of, we'll say Toronto and LA are his 2 options, because those were the 2 teams that he ended up with. Would you rather go to a team that has 2 already Japanese superstars, has a whole bunch more translators and data scientists and stuff that just is so much more modernly baseball geared with the Dodgers and has the top tier of every single thing that you could possibly think of in the baseball realm, or go to Toronto and it's just does not have those things. Like, it seems so obvious, and for people to get mad at Roki for choosing the Dodgers just doesn't make any sense to me. And at the end of the day, it comes down to those teams that the people are rooting for against them, like the Padres fans. Like, the main reason why Roki Sasaki didn't sign with the Padres is because the Padres organization isn't good enough to sign him. And all these other teams with, Shohei or even Juan Soto or all this stuff, it's on those teams that they're rooting for. It's their fault on why it's not happening. And all these people signing to the Dodgers is good for baseball as well, too, because it's getting talked about. I don't know. It just makes me upset. I know it's kind of an all over the place argument there, but I can understand being mad at the Dodgers because they have a good team. But just because they have a good team does not mean that they win the World Series. Case in point with the Seattle Mariners in 2001. They won 116 games and got kicked out in the ALDS, didn't even make it to the championship round. Baseball is not a game where you can have a super team and just automatically win championships. The point that Chris Rose made, too, in that same TikTok was, look at the NBA. And it seems more often than not that the number 1 spending team is in the conference finals or the NBA finals, whatever. It happens way more often in basketball than it does in the MLB. And we're not seeing, that same argument made in the NBA. Obviously, you saw it a bit more when, the Warriors were the Warriors and it was kind of, unplayable for a couple of years, but there's no way that baseball ever gets to that point because it's just not that type of game. There's way too many upsets. You're never going to see the spreads that you see in the NBA comparative to the MLB. It's just not going to happen that way. And I think people are getting a misguided representation of what the MLB actually is. So there's been a little rant on that. I won't talk about it again until opening day or whatever, but yeah.
Yeah, just to sweeten up your stat even more, I know off the top of my head that the only other team to win the World Series with the top payroll in this millennium is the '09 Yankees, one of the craziest super teams we've ever seen, especially in our lifetime since it's not as long. So I'm 100% with you there. The game's won on the field. Also, the other Hall of Famer in by the Players Committee, Dave Parker, two-time World Series winner, shows how long he played, long-time power hitter, won with the Pirates in the early 80s, and then with the A's, of course. Later in his career was a DH for us. So how about that? Beat the Giants.
Yeah, I was going to mention former A, so 1989, go. But moving on from that, though, we'll get back into baseball in a couple of weeks, but we're talking football for pretty much the rest of the episode. And we'll start off with our player, defensive player, and rookie of the week, as we always do. 3 awards, 3 different people for me. Who do you have as your player of the week?
Well, I think this has got to go to Saquon Barkley. The 5th most rushing yards in a single playoff game, 205 and 2 touchdowns to beat the Rams. Number 1 on that list is a former Ram, Eric Dickerson, by the way. Philly was down in this one with about 7 minutes left, but Kellen Moore kept calling Saquon's number. Doesn't matter if it's in the snow. 30 total times. His 78-yard house call was basically the kill shot, even though the Rams made things close at the end.
Yeah, Saquon's getting my player of the week, of course, as well, too. 205 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns. That last touchdown, the 78-yarder that Skyler just talked about, was like a signature moment of the NFL playoffs this year and of Saquon Barkley's career. In the snow, the whole slamming his head with his hand as he's like at the 20-yard line and was already gone. Like, we've seen it so many times from him this year. We've seen him have 4 60-plus yard touchdown runs against the Rams alone in the 2 games that he played against them this year. He's ridiculous. He's the best running back in football. And we'll talk more about him once we get to our top 10 running backs that we'll do here later on in the episode. Defensive player of the week, there was a ton of different guys who had some defensive impact. Who did you end up choosing as your guy for the defensive player of the week?
Shout out to the whole Washington secondary. They were really filthy against the Lions this weekend, but I'm going to go with the biggest game wrecker of the week, George Karlaftis of the Chiefs. The Texans decided to try and block a 260-pound madman with Dere Ogunbowale and a little chip from Dalton Schultz in the entire second half. That did not work, obviously. Karlaftis had 3 big sacks on 3rd and 4th down, hit C.J. Stroud about 12 more times throughout the game. It was really crazy. C.J. Stroud was it was harder and harder to get up after each hit by Karlaftis.
Yeah, that's a good choice. And I was really thinking about going for Karlaftis, but I went with Mikey Sanders still for his 2 interception performance against the Detroit Lions. He had the pick at the end of the first half, right at the goal line. If he didn't catch, probably would have been a touchdown for Jameson Williams. And then his second interception, ironically thrown by Jameson Williams, kind of sealed up the game for the Washington Commanders in their historical upset of the Detroit Lions. Their defense came to play in that game, forced three turnovers, I think. Might have been 4. But 3 turnovers for sure in that game. And Mikey Sanders, still the rookie, gets a couple of them. So guy who's made big plays all over his career is making some big plays in his first year as a Commander. What about Rookie of the Week?
For the 7th time this season, I think that's an immaculate sports record, Jaden Daniels will win the Rookie of the Week. In his rookie year, Daniels takes down the number 1 seed, Detroit Lions, with a near-perfect passer rating. He just looks so calm and confident each week. This is how Cam Ward thinks he looks out there. It's about 350 yards, 2 touchdowns, no turnovers, basically perfect, like I said, for Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, it's going to be JD for my Rookie of the Week as well, too. You said about 350 yards. It's exactly 350 yards. Okay. 299 through the air, 51 on the ground, 2 passing touchdowns as well, too. He played a great game against the Detroit defense that looked really good in Week 18. Obviously, there was an injury from Amik Robertson early in the game, but
nasty.
Still a great game from Jaden Daniels to get to the conference championship. And, I mean, if you told us even a year ago, without even looking at the pick, that the Commanders were going to be in the NFC conference championship game, I'd say, yeah, okay, buddy. Yeah, move on to the next one. But he's done it. What Jaden Daniels has done this year is ridiculous, and we will definitely be talking about him once we get to the top 10 quarterbacks this year as well, too. So we have 2 games this weekend. We kind of briefly talked about both of them, but we'll get into them now. The first of which is going to be the NFC Championship game, 12 o'clock Pacific Standard Time at Lincoln Financial Field in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where the Eagles will host the Washington Commanders, of course. Philadelphia is a 6-point favorite as of right now. How do you see this game going, Skyler, and who is your pick?
What a matchup. Another game being played for the third time this season. And, I figured that Vegas was wrong about the NFC. I just had the upsets backwards. Of course, if you remember, I picked Philadelphia and Detroit. The exciting part about Washington, though, is that you would imagine Jaden Daniels is just scratching the surface on his potential. And it's also hard to read their last matchup because Jalen Hurts wasn't playing, but also the commies have gotten progressively more unstoppable throughout the year on offense. So I think this one comes down to the Philly defense. They may need a couple new edge rushers this offseason, but it's the interior guys for them. If Jalen Carter and the linebackers fuck up the run game of Washington, they're going to win. I also can't imagine anyone on that defense slowing down Saquon Barkley right now because nobody has. I got Philly by a touchdown, 31-24.
Yeah, two very interesting games that we saw from these two teams when they played in the regular season. The second matchup is the one that's been talked about more, where the Washington Commanders had that crazy comeback. Jaden Daniels had 5 touchdown passes in a game that Jalen Hurts got hurt in the second possession of the game. Kenny Pickett played well. Probably good enough to get the win, but didn't due to a dropped pass by Devonta Smith. And then a forced field goal, I believe, happened after that. And then Washington went down and scored a touchdown with just seconds remaining. I believe Olamide Zaccheaus had the game-winning touchdown, or maybe it was Jamison Crowder. It might have been Crowder, actually, because I think he had 2 touchdowns in that game. But that was the game that really put Jaden Daniels on the, oh, shit, this guy's very much legit map, doing what he did against that Eagles defense. But the first game that they played, which I also believe was on prime time, I believe it was a Thursday night matchup early in the season where the Eagles won 26-18. And this seems more of the blueprint of what will happen in this game. What we saw in both those games, though, from the Eagles was relying on Saquon Barkley as they do the entire season. And in that game that they did win, Saquon had 2 late touchdowns, both of over 30 yards to win it for them. I can't see going anything different than that. I don't see how you can stop Saquon Barkley, especially late in the game. And he's been, able to take a 25 carry workload. Not a problem this entire season. I don't see it being a problem for him this week either. And this Washington defense is just not as good as Philly's. And on the other side of that, the Philly defense is way better than Detroit's was. So I don't think we're going to see those same breakout plays that we saw from the Commanders in the game against Detroit against his Philly defense. So I'll go the exact same score as the first game. I'll go 26-18. Philly gets the win and moves on to the Super Bowl. Next up, an old-fashioned 2020s rivalry, I guess you could call it at this point. The Bills and the Chiefs. This one is in Arrowhead, of course. Kansas City is a 2-point favorite. I've seen that line change quite a bit. I believe already is at 1 point when it opened, and then went to 2.5, and now it's back at 2. So how do you think this one plays out?
Something interesting I found today when looking at this game was that Patrick Mahomes threw 2 bad picks in their loss against the Bills earlier this season. Since then, Mahomes has 12 passing touchdowns to 0 interceptions. 0. The Bills are also on a roll at the moment. Obviously, they just won the biggest game of the season. It wasn't the prettiest game, but they beat Baltimore in time of possession, turnovers, penalties. They just overall haven't made any mistakes, really, down the stretch. I don't think many people would argue that Kansas City is the type of team that's going to try to come out on fire and embarrass a team they'd already lost to this season. I don't necessarily think it gets that far, but this game being at Arrowhead makes me think whatever kind of controversy is going to happen in this game is going to fall in Kansas City's favor per usual. So I got Kansas City winning 23-20. Really hoping it is a great game, but like I mentioned, I'm not shocked if Kansas City blows them out here. There's not a lot of teams that prepare like Kansas City.
Yeah, this is a fun matchup. what we saw last week between the Bills and the Ravens is an indicator that just because you played in the regular season doesn't mean, the game's going to be a carbon copy of that in the playoffs. Obviously, I just kind of said the exact opposite with Philly and Washington. But this one, when they played in the regular season, there were so many anomalies. And as we've seen in back-to-back years, there's been a wake-up call game for the Chiefs in 2023. You know what it was, that Christmas game against the Raiders. And in 2024, it was this game against the Bills, where you said that Mahomes didn't throw a pick after this, and he threw 2 picks in this game. This was the oh shit, let's lock it in moment, because we saw Patrick Mahomes kind of have that first half of the season that was just like they're winning games and then obviously undefeated for quite a while, but everybody's like, oh, Mahomes has how many interceptions and only has this many touchdowns? Okay, that's kind of weird. From there, he locked it in. We've seen him play some of his best football. I would say some of his best football. We've seen some pretty ridiculous football from this guy, but he's been playing great football for the past 10 weeks now at this point. The biggest thing for me that was a huge anomaly in this game is that Travis Kelce had 2 catches for 8 yards. I believe he also had a couple big drop passes in this one. This was also a game that Matt Milano did not play, so that's obviously going to change quite a bit up, as we saw that be a big difference for Buffalo in that game against Baltimore this past weekend. I just can't pick against Kansas City at home. I think Mahomes is going to be playing better. I think they're going to run the ball a bit more than they did in this game originally. And they're going to spread the ball around to the receivers that they have, because in this game they had Worthy with 4 catches, Hopkins 3 catches, Noah Gray had 2 touchdowns. Now all those guys are healthy, and they have Hollywood Brown in there. You would imagine Travis Kelce has a bit more inclusion in the offense as well too. And they were still giving carries to Carson Steele at this point. That guy is now like the backup fullback. So I'm picking Kansas City to win this one. I want the Bills, don't get me wrong, but I can't see Kansas City losing this game with the way that they just have been so dominant over the past 5 years of the sport. Moving on from that, though, we get into some fun rankings. The top 10 quarterbacks, top 10 running backs, and top 10 wide receivers. We'll start with the quarterbacks because that's the most important position on football. So do you have any honorable mentions or anybody that you want to talk about outside of the top 10?
Yeah, of course, especially for quarterback. A couple guys I wanted to mention: Jordan Love, Bo Nix, Brock Purdy, Aaron Rodgers. Definitely had shots to earn that top 10 spot this season. Just a little too inconsistent.
Yeah, 3 guys that I wanted to talk about. First of which is Matt Stafford. Only 20 passing touchdowns on the season, so I left him off. Just not quite the numbers that you would need in comparison to these other guys to put him on the list. Then again, I still think he played great. Aaron Rodgers, another good season, but as he said, bad seasons for him are career years for other quarterbacks, and that's exactly what it was for him. Just off the list, 28 touchdowns to 11 interceptions is not quite Aaron Rodgers-y enough for me. Last guy I did want to put on here, but I decided not to, is Bo Nix. Obviously, a great year as a rookie quarterback, 29 touchdowns, nearly 4,000 yards. Also did it with one of the worst run games in football, if not the worst, and one of the worst supporting casts around him, with only Courtland Sutton being pretty much the only recognizable name until it got to like week 12 when they started using Marvin Mims a bit more. But he's just not there. So I'd say Bo Nix would be 11. The rest of the guys kind of just honorable mentions. On to number 10.
All right. Well, at number 10, I have Justin Herbert of the Chargers. Things didn't end very well for them, but I thought this was a step in the right direction. Trying to learn how to be more of a game manager, I guess, because we all know he's got the arm strength. 23 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions in the regular season. I still think his future's bright. Maybe he's got a little Chargers curse in him for the postseason, but I'm still a believer.
Number 10 for me is going to be the ultimate gunslinger from this year. It's Baker Mayfield. Had a ridiculous season with 4,500 yards, 41 touchdowns, but also 16 interceptions. He also had 378 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns as well, too. I think his legs were definitely an underrated aspect of the season. And he just chucked it. And, that's pretty much all the Buccaneers offense was for half of the season until they kind of realized that Bucky Irving is a really good running back. And maybe we'll talk about Bucky Irving once we get to running backs. But Baker had a great year. Just the interceptions at 16 is a lot. So I can't put him any higher than what he is. That was tied for the lead in the NFL with Kirk Cousins, who's definitely not on this list. Number 9.
At number 9, I'm going to go with Sam Darnold of the Vikings. Very awesome surprise, I guess, for most teams, really. Minnesota kind of thought they were done this season. Sam Darnold throws for 4,300 yards, good for 5th in the league. Still makes his usual mistakes. Another kind of a gunslinger build, if you will. 35 touchdowns, 12 picks, but definitely going to make himself some money to some extent and give himself a couple more opportunities.
Yeah. Number 9 for me is going to be where I put Justin Herbert. His yardage numbers got better later in the season, I would say, but still only 23 touchdowns. But the biggest thing for me was only 3 interceptions in the entirety of the regular season. Obviously, we know the postseason did not quite work out because he threw 4 interceptions in a single game, but he played really good football in the offense that he was designed to play this year, which was don't do anything crazy. Take what's there and move the chains and let your defense help you out and get the job done. He did a great job of that this year, and he really found a good number 1 in Ladd McConkey as well, too. On to number 8.
At number 8, I'm going to go with Jalen Hurts. Didn't have a bad season, obviously still in the hunt here, but was a little banged up, had a couple of rough games, finished 20th only in passing yards, threw the ball around the same amount of times as a Bryce Young did or a Jameis Winston this season. So I feel like I can't really give him that top 5 spot. But of course, he gets it done just as well with his legs. So I'm sure he'll be on this list for years to come.
Yeah. Number 8 for me is going to be where I slot Sam Darnold. Like you said, 4,300 yards, 35 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Kind of came out of nowhere this year. Originally wasn't even going to be his job. We'd imagine with J.J. McCarthy being the guy there. Maybe, he would have started week 1 or week 2, and maybe he could have got started the entire year based off of how that have went because he played really well in those first couple of games. But that's, hindsight stuff. Regardless, Sam Darnold played a great year. 5th in the league in yards is pretty ridiculous. Like you said, the gunslinger aspect with him as well, too, was very evident. Made some mistakes later on in the season that we saw in Week 18 and also in that playoff game. But overall, a great season for Sam Darnold and definitely earned him some generational wealth this offseason. Next up, number 7.
At 7, I'm going to go with Baker Mayfield, another gunslinger, like you said, at 4,500 for him. Good for 3rd in the league. 41 touchdowns, man. Another guy who just needed that one extra shot. He got paid. And now we're even beyond that point. He won his division again. I feel like he's found a really nice home in Tampa.
Number 7 for me is going to be where I slot Jalen Hurts. 15 games, but really you could say 14 because one of those was that game against Washington where he got a concussion. So really 14 and a drive of football in the regular seasons for Jalen Hurts. Only 2,900 yards, but 18 passing touchdowns and 5 interceptions to go along with 14 rushing touchdowns. It was a great year for him. We know what he's the best at, and that's a tush push. And I think a lot of people have been giving Jalen Hurts a lot of shit this year for not putting up these ridiculous numbers. But he doesn't have to, man. He's got Saquon. He just hands it off to him and lets him do the work. And we know, as we saw against the Rams, on that first quarter run, that he's capable of doing a lot of things with the ball in his hands. So Jalen Hurts, I still think, had a great season. Definitely not, shouting for him to be MVP, but a good, safe year from the Philadelphia quarterback. Number 6.
At 6, I'm going with the savior, Jared Goff. An amazing season, right? Finished 2nd in passing yards, 37 touchdowns, and only Tua was more accurate than him this season. And we know that Tua doesn't push the ball down the field like Jared Goff's been working on here in Detroit. Gets rid of the ball really quickly, only took 31 sacks compared to, we'll say, Burrow at number 1, right, is 48 sacks this season. So another guy who's found a really nice home. This is probably the ceiling of his career, but we'll see if they can go on another playoff run with him.
Yeah, Jared Goff is my number 6 as well, too. Definitely changed his, I guess, I wouldn't say connotation, but like the outlook around him in the past couple of years ever since he got to Detroit. Has really become this kind of model of a, doesn't really have the greatest physical talents, but could really kind of understand an offense and run it well. I need that to pretty much perfection for the entirety of the regular season. 4,600 yards, like you talked about, 37 passing touchdowns and 12 interceptions. Just was super efficient with the ball until it got to the playoffs and he made some bad mistakes. Also had 5 interceptions in a game. So if you take out that game against Houston, he had 7 interceptions in 16 games. So did a good job, but just not enough in the end. Number 5.
At number 5's where I'm going to slot the rookie, Jaden Daniels. Amazing season. We mentioned him already when previewing his championship game. Incredible. This isn't supposed to happen for a rookie quarterback. And this is another guy who's not going to be at the top of the passing yards because they haven't been throwing the ball 50 times a game like some other teams, but he's 4th in QBR, obviously got the legs working too, 900 yards in his rookie year. This guy's definitely got Lamar Jackson potential, and it's pretty incredible because not a lot of people saw this coming.
Yeah. Number 5 for me is going to be where I slot Patrick Mahomes. I did put the rookie ahead of him. It just was a down year for Patrick, and I know regardless, it's still almost 4,000 yards, 26 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. Pretty comparable numbers to Aaron Rodgers, but obviously we see how things went in the end for Patrick a bit different. I think there's been this idea that he hasn't had a ton of work with over the past couple of years, ever since Tyreek Hill left. I don't think that's true at all. I think he's got a great cast around him for the majority of the year. So I'm not really using that as a knock or anything like that, but a very good second half from Patrick Mahomes. If it was just the first 8 weeks of this, I don't think he'd be in my top 10. But obviously we know who Patrick Mahomes is, and I think we give him the benefit of the doubt for that as well too. So he still is in my top 5. Number 4.
So yeah, I did give the 4 spot to Patrick Mahomes. Obviously the numbers are a little down. 7th in passing yards for a guy like Patrick Mahomes, kind of pedestrian, but to the rest of the league, it's completely fine. That's just wasn't their style this year. And they still won games. He still had the same QBR as a Jaden Daniels. Maybe it's more superstitious, but so far I'm going to take Patrick Mahomes head to head over Jaden Daniels at this point still.
Yeah, of course. Number 4 for me is going to be where I slot Jaden Daniels. A ridiculous rookie season, one of the best rookie seasons we've ever seen from a quarterback. Not just the 3,500 passing yards, 25 touchdowns through the air, but also 891 yards on the ground and 6 touchdowns. He ran more than any other quarterback. One thing I want to see from him is to take a bit less hits. We see the yard per carry be quite a bit lower than Lamar Jackson, and I'm not knocking him for not being as good of a runner as Lamar, but when you're a quarterback and you are maybe not as physically built as some of the other quarterbacks are as far as strength goes, you got to take less hits. I think Jaden Daniels did not do a good job of that this year. Regardless, a ridiculous season. Also did not have a ton of stuff to work with. He had Terry McLaurin, who's been great, one of the best receivers in the league, who we probably will talk about in our top 10 receivers list. But outside of that, revived Zach Ertz's career and was doing it with a banged-up running back duo the entire year, Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler. So great job for doing a lot with not a ton around you and Jaden Daniels. And obviously still playing till this day. Into the top 3, we all know who the 3 names are, just about how you order them.
Yeah, we'll start it off with Joe Burrow, the man who threw the ball more than anyone this season, but he also did have the most passing yards, 4,900, pushing that record, and 43 passing touchdowns. The only difference here is that he doesn't have the running game that the other 2 do, but this is our top 3 right now, the future of the league, if you will. Some are, I've realized the 2 guys at the top we're going to get to are pushing 30. So time flies, I guess, when you're winning games, but still on the younger end of things.
Yeah. Joe Burrow is my number 3 as well, too. Definitely was the best passer of the football this year. 4,900 yards, 43 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, like you said. Obviously doesn't have that running aspect, but I don't think that hurts him too much because he just is such a good passer. also had the top receiver in the NFL this year as well too, and Jamar Chase, who we'll talk about, and T. Higgins as well too. Obviously, still doing this for the fifth year or whatever with a pretty shitty offensive line. It needs to be something that they address in Cincinnati in the offseason. It feels like we've said that for year after year after year at this point, but it's true. Or else we're going to see Joe Burrow a lot less because he's going to be getting hurt a lot more. All right, number two.
At number two, I'm going to go with Josh Allen. Maybe a little bit of what happened with Mahomes here. He just threw the ball way less this season, 100 less times than last year. His lowest passing yards since his second year, 3,700. But still, number two in QBR this season. 28 touchdowns passing to 6 picks only, and another 12 rushing touchdowns. This is kind of like who we thought Cam Newton was going to be. So obviously he's up at the top in conversation for the MVP. He's number two for me.
Yeah. Josh Allen is my number two as well, too. I think we saw a lot of growth from him this year. When we saw 2021, 2022, Josh Allen, or even last year with him, he had the ability to make those ridiculous plays, but he would also just make the dumbest mistakes at times. And we're starting to see him still make those great plays, but not make the dumb mistakes. Obviously, when you have to do that, you are having a bit more risk assessment, and you're not going to have as many passing yards. But he's been so efficient this year, 28 touchdowns through the air, 12 touchdowns on the ground, 531 rushing yards to go with his 3,700 passing yards, and only 6 interceptions. And I think the biggest thing for him is one, he doesn't take sacks. I believe only took 14 sacks over the course of the regular season, partially because of great O-line and partially just because he's got that kind of Big Ben type, not taking sacks, big type dude in the pocket. But he did not lose a fumble the entirety of the year, and that is really hard to do when you throw the ball 480 times and run the ball 101 times in the season. So Josh Allen, T's and P's, but you're number two.
One. Yeah, it's Lamar Jackson. Like we were saying, Josh Allen makes a really great case here, but Lamar is starting to put himself into a completely different category because once again, he's number one in efficiency this season by far. Kind of grouped with a Steve Young, if you will, when you're trying to find a comparison. But this season, he had over 4,000 yards, 41 passing touchdowns, only 4 interceptions. He had one mistake throw against Buffalo, and obviously they're not going to the Super Bowl this year. They're done. They don't get another crack at Kansas City because of that. But overall, he's basically playing perfect. The only other quarterback with 900 rushing yards, of course, too, with Jaden Daniels. Just unbelievable. Just straight up video game numbers.
Yeah. We hear the term 5-tool player a lot in baseball. I'm kind of surprised there's not a similar aspect or term when it comes to football, because if there's a 5-tool quarterback, it's Lamar Jackson, and there's not a ton of guys. Maybe there's not that term because it's never happened in the sport. The ability that Lamar Jackson has to throw the football while also being able to run it at the rate that he does is never before seen in the sport. It really is. And I think it's very easy to say that he's the most talented player to ever play the game. I don't want people coming, at my neck for saying that, but when you look at his ability to run the ball, throw the ball, and to do it efficiently and not make the mistakes that, some of these other people have that great playmaking ability do, it's pretty ridiculous. And I know, like you said, didn't work out for him in the playoffs. He had a rough fumble in the game against Buffalo and a pretty, nonsensical interception that didn't really make sense. He's amazing. He's going to win his 3rd MVP, and I would not be shocked if he just continues to get better and better and better and wins a 4th and a 5th and hopefully one day a Super Bowl, because that'd be really fun to see.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to running backs, though. Anybody just off you want to talk about?
Yeah, another group of 5 guys that I think will be back for sure. You mentioned Bucky Irving earlier, didn't make it for me. We got Breece Hall, another guy who was injured. Chuba Hubbard, Devon Achane, and J.K. Dobbins. Great seasons.
Just off for me, I have three guys. First of which is Alvin Kamara, who was hurt for a good portion, but still really efficient in the time that he was healthy. Joe Mixon, another one as well too, that was hurt for a bit. Also not the most efficient numbers, but he was a bowling ball for a good portion of the season, and I didn't really expect that. And the last guy, James Conner, another good season for James Conner, who's really putting in a pretty good career now at this point.
I'll
So
shout him out too. He didn't.
shout out to
didn't
those guys. But before we get into the list, I do want to say for mine, something I do value a ton is efficiency. So if aren't having a ton of yards per carry, and you're going to get bumped down a little bit for me. Starting off with number 10, who do you got?
I'm going to start off with Joe Mixon, a guy who also was hurt this season, but still finished strong, over 1,000 yards, 8 big-time runs, 11 touchdowns with a horrific offensive line that was exposed against Kansas City this week.
Bit of a shocker for me at the 10 spot. You're not going to like this, but I do have Kyren Williams here, and it's exactly for the efficiency numbers. The lowest yards per carry out of any guy on this list for me. He did have the 14 touchdowns, and obviously also has that ridiculous kind of dual threat ability that now pretty much every running back has in the top 10 of this list of the pass and through the run. But Kyren Williams does get the 10 spots, even though he only averaged 4.1 yards per carry. Moving on to number 9.
At number 9, I do have Alvin Kamara still making the list because of his impact with the rookie quarterback, Spencer Rattler, at the end of the season. He still had 68 catches this season. That's unbelievable. That's more than his entire 2022, 2021 seasons do. Also, when you just look at the just the rushing stats, still had that 4 yards per carry. Didn't quite get 1,000, but 50 yards away. He would have got that in his next game if they needed him. They didn't. But I'm still watching you, Alvin Kamara. He's not getting old yet.
No. Number 9 for me is going to be where I slot James Cook. 16 rushing touchdowns, was tied for the most in the NFL with Jahmyr Gibbs and Derrick Henry. Only 207 carries, but over 1,000 yards, just barely at 1,009. So 4.9 yards per carry, and only one fumble this year that they did not lose. So it's a big one. James Cook at number 9. Number 8.
At number 8, I'm going with Kyren Williams. I'm completely on board with what you said about him. He helped me so much in fantasy, but more of the bruiser type than the big playmaker. 1,300 yards, incredible. But he hasn't really broken one at all. His longest run, 30 yards of his career. So just interesting to watch out for. Watch out for the fumbles. But when you don't look at that stuff, that's still a top 10 running back in the league.
Yeah. The fumbles definitely was another aspect that I didn't mention that I should have. If your name was not Ramondre Stevenson, Kyren Williams was the running back that had the most fumbles this year. So there is that. Number 8 for me is going to be where I slot Bucky Irving. The same amount of carries as James Cook, but had 100 more yards than him. Obviously, the touchdowns weren't quite there, only 8 compared to James Cook's 16. But the efficiency of getting 5.4 yards per carry was pretty big. What we saw Bucky Irving do in the second half of the season is definitely going to be an indication of what he does in his sophomore year. Just a great year as a whole for Bucky, and I expect a lot more next year. Number 7.
At number 7, I have James Cook up a little higher here because maybe he wasn't as efficient. But here's the thing about James Cook. At only 190 pounds, he was running people over all season long. He hit that 1,000-yard mark. He had those 16 touchdowns. So important for this Bills team getting this far, and he earned that extension he's about to get.
Yeah. Number 7 for me, a big year from a guy that we didn't expect it from, is Chuba Hubbard, number 7 spot. Almost 1,200 yards, 10 touchdowns, 250 carries for a guy that missed a couple of games and was in one of the worst offenses for the league for a good portion of that year before Bryce Young decided to turn it on late in the season. Just a guy that we knew had the ability, but was kind of shocked in his first couple of years of the NFL. We're like, damn, I thought he was going to be a stud. And now he is. He got the extension in the season as well, too. So great year for Chuba Hubbard, and looking more for him in coming years as well, too, as that Panthers team continues to get better. Number 6.
At number 6, I'm going to go with Bijan Robinson of the Falcons. Another one of those power back guys. I kind of have him similar to Kyron Williams at this point, but don't be fooled by the name. He didn't lose any fumbles this season. Almost 1,500 yards. Another one of those guys who can get 300 carries and be completely fine. Just a guy who, again, hasn't really broke one. Never had that 40-yard touchdown run, and I'm sure it's coming at some point. Just not quite yet. Not quite top 5 for me.
Number 6 for me is going to be where I slot Josh Jacobs. 15 rushing touchdowns plus his first career receiving touchdown earlier in the season. Over 300 carries once again for him. 1,300 rushing yards in his first year in Green Bay. A great year. They relied on him pretty heavily throughout that year as well, too. Did have 4 fumbles. That's why he's not higher on this list. But a great total year from Josh Jacobs. And wish he was still a Raider, even though he does not like the Raider fans. Number 5.
Yeah, I got Josh Jacobs starting off the top 5 here. Just really solid all season. Played all 17 games, over 300 carries, 6th in rushing yards this season, and 15 touchdowns. I feel like most of his basically any evidence of what he did this season was in the first half. Just imagine if they ran the ball a little more in Green Bay. Would make sense in the cold, but then again, I'm not Mike LaFleur or Matt, whatever his freaking name is. Great season for Josh Jacobs.
Number 5 for me is going to be where I slot Jonathan Taylor. A ridiculous season for a guy who only played 14 games, averaged over 100 yards per game with 1,431 yards on the season. 11 touchdowns and 3 fumbles. Probably could have easily been 12 touchdowns and 2 fumbles if he didn't, have that crucial moment at the goal line in that game against Denver. Also, probably would have added a couple more yards in that game as well, too. A great year for Jonathan Taylor. But these top 4 guys are either named Derrick Henry or have a bit more receiving aspect to them than Jonathan Taylor does. So that's why he's at number 5 and not higher. Number 4.
At 4, I do have Jonathan Taylor one spot above. He had 1 less carry than Bijan Robinson in 3 less games. Just an absolute workhorse for this team. Things were not going right at all for the quarterback position. He really made a push there for the playoffs, right? If Denver wasn't 2 or 3 games above Indy would be one of the next teams there in the playoffs. 11 touchdowns for him in a limited season. Also broke a couple 70-yard touchdowns too. I really love the big play threats in this league. That's why I have him up there.
Yeah. Number 4 for me is going to be where I slot Bijan. Was 3rd in the league in rushing, only behind 2 guys that will be higher than him for sure. Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley, 14 touchdowns. Just a complete year from Bijan Robinson is something that we've been looking for, and we get it now in his 2nd season. So Bijan, he's a stud. We know it, and now we can expect to see him get the ball a lot more than what he was getting in his rookie year with Tyler Algier taking some of his carries. Number 3.
At number 3, I'm going to go with Jahmyr Gibbs. It hurts to not put him at the top spot, but based off of what we've seen from him. But there's 2 other guys who were just absolute workhorses this year. Gibbs wasn't really until the second half of the second half, right? The last 4 games, he really took over that starting job when Montgomery got hurt. 1,400 yards, 5.5 per carry, 16 touchdowns. Of course, tied for the top. No fumbles. And a great receiver. It doesn't get much better than that. I'm excited to see what he's going to be capable because he's the closest I think we've seen to Saquon Barkley as a prospect in a while. And it's no knock to Bijan at all. It's just a different type of speed.
Yeah. Now, all the numbers you said, plus the 500 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns through the air, he's a ridiculous player. And I hate saying it because I know the relationship isn't that way, but David Montgomery, just go to another team or something so we could see this guy get 300 carries per year and, have some ridiculous seasons because he's up there with Saquon and the explosiveness is just a different caliber of player. And him and Saquon, I believe, are now the 2 most talented backs in the league. And that's no knock on Derrick Henry. He's really Derrick. I'll talk about Derrick Henry later, so I'm not going to talk about him yet. But Jahmyr Gibbs, a ridiculous player. So excited to see whenever he gets the football, like when they hand off the ball to to Jameer and he's 7 yards back or whatever, and he just gets a run with a pulling Penei Sewell or something, like you're like, holy shit, yeah, he's going to take it 70 yards, and it feels like he does it more often than he doesn't. Like you said, 5.6 yards per carry is pretty ridiculous. 13 big runs this year. Extremely fun to watch. Jahmyr Gibbs. Number two.
At number two, we got Derrick Henry. Like you said, everyone said Baltimore was crazy. He's already 31. What are we doing here? They're a speed zone running scheme. This will never work. Well, he was second in carries, second in yards with 1,900. Could you imagine just a couple of years ago saying that 31-year-old Derrick Henry would almost hit 2,000 again? Unbelievable. Also 16 touchdowns, really efficient. We're just starting to see, it's not necessarily a drop-off. It's just that his monster games aren't quite what they used to be when he go play at Tennessee and or with Tennessee against a Jacksonville and have like 290 and 4 touchdowns. That's probably never happening. That's reserved for our top spot guy. But just fantastic. Running back position, definitely not dead.
Yeah, only a light 325 carries for Derrick Henry this year. He had 280 last year, 349 the year before that. He had 219 carries in 8 games in 2021, which is ridiculous. Would have been on pace for 400 something that year. He had 378 the year before that, 303 the year before that. We've seen the stats. He's gotten the ball a ridiculous amount ever since high school. He's like the LeBron James of running backs at this point, where he just, no matter the workload, he's never going to let up. But he is super one-dimensional, but that doesn't affect him at all. He's so fun to watch still. 5.9 yards per carries, the most he's had in a year in his entirety of his NFL career. Also had 2 receiving touchdowns this year. And if you combine the rushing and the receiving, then he gets over that 2,000-yard threshold, which is pretty cool. He definitely beat the washed allegations for sure this year. And I'm looking forward to him being there next year as well, too, and seeing what him and Lamar do, because they only make each other better. And that downhill running scheme is only going to get better. So 32-year-old Derrick Henry, 35-year-old Derrick Henry, doesn't matter. He's still going to be running people over into the end zone. And he's as fast as ever as well, too, which is ridiculous. Number 1, and we know who this goes to.
Yeah, that's Saquon Barkley. We've already talked about him a bunch today for good reason. I think a lot of us deep down had the feeling that, hey, imagine if this guy just was the entire offense, got over 300 carries for the first time. And he did this season and went for 2,000 yards. Like we talked about, he had more carries than Derrick Henry this season. Only 13 touchdowns, but that's because there's a lot of guys running the ball for Philly. It's not just Saquon. But it might be for the rest of the season because no one has stopped him yet. And I'm just happy for him, man. I know it's got to be tough to be a Giants fan seeing this, but I mean, you heard some of the quotes, right? Why would we pay a running back this when we're paying Daniel Jones $40 million? Well, that's, don't make 2 rights try to turn into a wrong. That doesn't work all the time. So, man, Saquon Barkley, top running back.
Yeah, we really got to see this year what it's like to give the best running back in football the best O-line in football as well, too. And Mike Tirico said it a ton in that game on Sunday. The biggest home run threat in the league, and it's so true. He has the innate ability to just break off these ridiculously long runs in an instant. And it's not like, he breaks a tackle, and then he's gone. It's, okay, 1 cut now and he's gone. Because he would have those, break 3 tackles and, get a 35-yard gain with the Giants, and that would happen. But now he doesn't have to break those tackles, and he can just use that generational Adrian Peterson-like explosiveness that he has. And just watch the 2. Like, watch AP the year after he tore his ACL and had that ridiculous season, and go watch Saquon this year, and they just feel like the same back. And it's so fun to watch. Maybe AP is a bit more, brute force type guy, and Saquon's a bit more side to side, but the explosiveness is off the charts on both those dudes. And I'm looking forward to watching Saquon play this Sunday and maybe in a couple Sundays as well, too, because he's definitely a Super Bowl MVP candidate for sure. On to receivers, the last position group that we'll do today. Starting off with honorable mentions.
Yeah, of course. I had a couple here. I tried to stay to 5. I ended up making it 6. Lot of guys stepping up this season in a very pass-heavy league. We got Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, Ladd McConkey. Didn't quite make the top 10, but definitely all having Pro Bowl type seasons.
Yeah, there's 4 dudes I wanted to talk about on my honorable mentions. The first of which is Nico Collins, who was hurt for a bit of the season, but still got over 1,000 yards in just 12 games. Next is A.J. Brown, who also had injury issues, only had played 13 games this year and had nearly 1,100 yards, which is pretty ridiculous. Mike Evans, we know, got to the 1,000-yard mark, but he was just off my top 10 list. And the last guy is going to be T. Higgins, who only played 12 games as well, too, but over 900 yards, 12 touchdowns, or 10 touchdowns, my bad. And if he, played 17 games, we would have probably been looking at him having close to 1,500 yards. So those 4 guys are the guys that I have on my honorable mentions, but definitely can make a case for 10 others as well, too. Number 10.
My number 10 would have been Nico Collins. I decided not to use him here, even though in fantasy football and whatnot, he was completely fine. I have to go with my guy, Garrett Wilson. All right. Here's the thing about Garrett Wilson this year. With all the controversy and basically being a wide receiver 2 for the whole season, whether it was to Lazard or Devontae, that was a weird couple of weeks to start off the year. He still finished with 100 catches and 1,000 yards. Once again, the only player in Jets history to do this. 3 straight seasons to open up the career. Just an amazing player to watch, and I really believe he belongs here. I just think we need to start emphasizing it because he's one of the best route runners I've seen. We don't get blue chippers walking in the building very often, and he's one I don't want to ever see leave.
Number 10 for me, I'll start off with a guy who's drastically different than Garrett Wilson. It's going to be Ladd McConkey, who had a great rookie season for the the Los Angeles Chargers. 1,150 or 49 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 82 receptions in 16 games. I thought Ladd was just going to be, a solid slot guy, and he's not that. He's got speed that I did not know that he had. It had a great rookie year with the Chargers, and I expect him to grow on those numbers as well too in the future. Number 9.
At number 9, I am going to go with A.J. Brown. I know he missed a good amount of time there, but he was still averaging 80 yards per game in an extremely run-heavy environment. This guy is just incredible. He's one of the hardest guys to guard in the league. He's out there reading books during timeouts and commercials. It is hilarious, and he's completely unfazed. And, guys like this makes me think maybe Philly actually could do it this year. I don't know. You were on top of it from the beginning. I was a little more hesitant. But Philly looks pretty unstoppable.
Number 9 for me is going to be a guy that I heavily disliked going into this year because his time as a Bronco, I just did not like him. I have Jerry Jeudy here. Great season, number 6 in receiving yards at 1,229, 90 receptions. Only isn't higher on this list because he was partially a Jameis Winston merchant, and we see those Jameis Winston merchants come alive every year when he plays. And only had 4 touchdowns, but he still was effective when DTR was in there and Deshaun Watson was in there. He still had good games with those guys as well, too. So shout out to Jerry Jeudy on having a good year. If he does it again next year, I'll be shocked, though. Number 8.
At number 8, I'm going to go with Scary Terry McLaurin. Very similar numbers to A.J. Brown. The difference is he finished the season, all 17 games, and scored 13 times. Wasn't really sure if he'd develop into that top deep threat, but I really have no questions about this team anymore. It seems like they'll be looking for more of a number 2 instead of trading for a Tyreek, if you will. So just a very important piece that helps Jaden Daniels, Scary Terry.
Number 8 for me, a really good year when his quarterback goes down and was battling injury for most of the year as well, too. I'm going with CeeDee Lamb here. Over 100 catches again, 1,194 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. Obviously, it's not the year that we were expecting from CD going into the season. We'd probably expect 120 catches, 1,600 yards, and probably the same amount of touchdowns, 16 or something like that. But still, with Cooper Rush, he was super effective. Wasn't that big play guy this year, which was something that was kind of down with him. But really good possession guy for Cooper Rush late in the season. If Dak comes back healthy this year or next year, I fully expect him to, go back to having those ridiculous seasons. He's one of the most fun receivers to watch in the league. Number 7.
At number 7, I'm going to go with another guy I had on my fantasy team, Malik Neighbors. 109 catches, only Brock Bowers. I've worded that horribly. The only other rookie to have more catches was Brock Bowers, a tight end. So he's not in this list yet. But I want to shout out your guy too. Just the way he played this season with no quarterbacks, no offensive line, the team actively tanking. He kind of kept his cool better than I thought he would. There was a couple moments like, man, I don't know if I want to play for this guy or whatnot, but I'm really happy with what Malik Neighbors did this season, 80 yards per game.
Yeah. Number 7 for me is going to be where I slot Terry McLaurin. His 13 receiving touchdowns was only behind the guy who's going to be number 1 on our list, and Jamar Chase. Was a ridiculously good deep threat on just go routes from Jane Daniels this year. We saw multiple touchdowns late in games throughout the entirety of the season that won them games, just on Terry going up and catching the ball. Then we saw a different type of Terry McLaurin in that game against the Lions where he took a screen pass, I believe, like 58 yards to the house for a touchdown. That was not something I expected to see from him. That kind of opened my eyes a bit more. But Terry's been a guy, definition of, head down, work hard for the last 5 years or however long he's been in Washington with all the quarterbacks he's navigated. Now finally has his guy, and we're seeing him have some great year this year. And I expect him to continue having great years in the future as well, too. Number 6.
At number 6, I'm going with Brian Thomas Jr., another rookie, and talk about a deep threat. This guy had the 3rd most receiving yards in the league with only 87 catches, 133 targets, though. Still scored 10 touchdowns despite Mac Jones playing half of the season for them. And I've mentioned it before, I think Jacksonville might be 0-17 without Brian Thomas Jr. He was that good this year. And Evan Ingram going down too, they really needed him. Definitely had a better season than Marvin, and no one was really expecting that.
Yeah. Number 6 for me is going to be our slot Drake London, 4th in receiving yards this year of 1,271, 9 touchdowns, and even 100 catches. Pretty interesting career so far for Drake London and the quarterbacks that he's had to navigate. Seems like what we saw at the end of the season is going to be here for a while, though, with Michael Penix, and I'm sure he enjoys it as well, too, as did Bijan Robinson, who said, actually, I believe after the last game that he was ready to play a whole another 16, which is usually a good sign for your players. But Drake London, another good year. And now finally has the quarterback of the future there in Atlanta as well, too. Number 5.
Yeah, at 5 is where I have Drake London too. And I completely agree. A guy who's had some crazy injury history in the past looked really fresh this year. He played all 17, 100 catches for the first time ever, 12 big-time plays and 9 touchdowns. Those are basically the same, I guess, for a receiver. But I agree, man. Next season, you're going to want to take this guy in the first round of the fantasy draft because Michael Penix loves to throw that bitch up in the air. And how about a big 6'5" receiver like Drake London just ready to explode next season? It's going to be fun.
Yeah. Number 5 for me is going to be where I slot Brian Thomas Jr. for his ridiculous rookie campaign, almost 1,300 yards, 10 touchdowns, and an offense. It did not look much like an offense for the majority of that season. And I'll admit it, for Brian Thomas Jr., I did not expect him to be anything close to this. I didn't know too much about him. I know he was at LSU. He had some great years there. But I kept on going throughout the season. I'm like, is this guy really that good? Is he that good? And then he has another great game. And then he has another great game. I'm like, okay, maybe he's decent. Ends up doing it throughout the entirety of the season. Still tremendously underrated, I would say. I don't think he was getting quite the headlines that maybe Malik Neighbors or even Brock Bowers or even Ladd McConkey were getting from rookie, receiver stature this year. He had a great year. in a pretty shitty system. So Brian Thomas Jr. is my number 5 guy. On to number 4.
At number 4, I'm not taking the stripes away from CD Lamb yet. I know it was a down year, but he still has 100 catches, almost 1,200 yards with Cooper Rush and whatever was going on with Dak when he was playing this season. Just a complete disaster from the Cowboys, but that's not his fault necessarily. He has more big-time catches than any of the other guys we talked about, it looks like, other than A.J. Brown. And no, yeah, we didn't talk about Zay Flowers. He didn't earn that one. But yeah, it's more about for the future with him. I don't think he digressed at all this season. I think he earned the contract he got. And he had basically the same season as Brock Bowers. So I know you know exactly how that feels. We just got to wait and see.
Number 4 for me is going to be where I slot Malik Neighbors. Unfortunately for Brian Thomas Jr., not even the highest rookie wide receiver, not even the highest rookie first-round wide receiver, not even the highest rookie first-round wide receiver out of LSU.
Yeah.
It's just tough, and I think that's probably why Brian Thomas is in a shadow right now. But Malik Neighbors had a pretty ridiculous season in an even worse situation than Jacksonville, and that's pretty damn hard to do. If Jacksonville was considered an offense, then you might as well just consider the Giants is like their offense was playing defense, it felt like, for most of the year. 1,200 yards, though, for Malik Neighbors, 7 touchdowns, 109 catches in only 15 games. Would definitely have set the rookie record if he played all 17. But a great year from Malik. I think we saw his full bag this year as well, too, in the kind of completeness of his game. But I really like his run after the catch ability, and he's going to be great when he has a quarterback that's there. So no denying that. I think Malik Neighbors is going to be a first-round fantasy pick for years to come. Mm-hmm. Number 3.
At number 3, I'm going with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Again, I wasn't bothered that he didn't break any records or anything like that because Detroit didn't really need him to this year. And he still had 115 catches, 5th in receiving yards, 12 touchdowns, really good in the red zone, a lot of first downs, a lot of yards after contact. And that's that new style, right? It's the bigger body slot receiver. Everyone needs a Jameson Williams, but that can't be your number 1. You need a guy who's smarter than everyone on the field, and that's St. Brown playing against zone coverage this year.
Yeah, Amon-Ra is my number 3 guy as well, too. I think he perfectly fits into the slot. 115 catches, like you said, 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns. Just felt like the most consistent wide receiver this year as far as every game he's going to have 5 catches, 60 yards or 70 yards, and a touchdown. And that's pretty much exactly what he did for the entirety of the season. Had a couple outliers in there. That he had 14-catch, 190-something yard game against Buffalo in the game that they lost, but really efficient. Obviously kind of has to do with Goff as well too, but 141 targets to 115 catches is kind of unheard of in this stuff. And there is like a 7-week stretch where every single target he got turned into a catch. That doesn't happen often. Just a great year from Amon-Ra, very well-rounded and a smart receiver, like you said as well.
Great blocker too. You don't get fancy points for that.
That's true. But we all know who the number 1 and number 2 guys are. Start off with number 2, though.
Yeah, weird to not have Justin Jefferson at the top, but once you get into what happened this season, you start to understand. Justin Jefferson, in a tough situation, his quarterback gets hurt, actually turns in a really great year with Sam Darnold. 100 catches, 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns, 90 per game, everything you can ask from him, right? It's your usual Jetta season. He plays every game. It's just that his former teammate was through the roof this season, and we'll get to him in a minute.
Yeah. Justin Jefferson, crazy season, 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns, 103 catches, just kind of seems ho-hum for him, I'm not going to lie. But that's just the receiver Justin Jefferson is. We've expected him to be, one of the best, if not the best wide receiver in football in his first 5 years of his career. Still the ultimate big play guy. I believe he led all wide receivers in big plays this year with 28, which I believe is plays over 20 yards or maybe 15. I believe it's probably over 20, but crazy year for Justin Jefferson. Just the complete wide receiver for sure. But nothing on number 1 this year. It was pretty crazy to see.
Yeah, LSU takes back wide receiver I think this season. with Jamar Chase at the top here. I'm curious if anyone's ever had more than 175 targets in a season, because that is a ridiculous amount of targets. He caught 127 of them. Your percentage isn't going to be as high as an Amon-Ra St. Brown, but still incredible deep threat too. 1,700 yards. He had the most receiving touchdowns in the league with 17, 100 per game. And those guys' defense and O-line were so roughed up this season in Cincinnati that it was basically those two up until T. Higgins came back, just trying to do it by themselves. And they came pretty close, Kyle. Came pretty close, but didn't quite make the playoffs. Still an incredible season to build off of for Jamar Chase. They had some contract issues. Doesn't seem like that's a problem anymore.
Well, the only issue with contract is if there is enough money in Cincinnati to pay Jamar Chase. But a ridiculous season, 127 catches, 1,700 yards, 17 touchdowns, Triple Crown. There's not a lot of words when it comes to this guy and his completeness of his game. It felt like it was the run game. Like, that's how sure it felt for sometimes in this offense, where they would just quick out, let Jamar Chase break a tackle, and the next thing you know, he gets 15, 20 yards out of bounds, and the game keeps moving on. That's how sure of a thing it felt, especially late in the year, and the chemistry that him and Joe had, where it was just like, put it in a shoebox and he'll catch it and he'll go make a play with it. I think the biggest thing for me was the yards after catch for him. 787 yards after the catch was the most in the NFL by 122 yards. The guy below him was Devon Achane, who had more yards after catch than receiving yards. So that kind of tells you about his depth of target. But a ridiculous season from Jamar Chase. He's so fun to watch after the catch. I think if put him at running back, like he'd be a great running back there as well too. I mean, he's so fun to watch. As a bettor, he was so fun to bet on this year as well too. He had some ridiculous games, and it felt like a sure thing that he was going to score. It felt like a sure thing that he was going to get the ball, and it felt like the sure thing, whether it was throwing it deep or throwing it short or having him run a route, like he was going to make a play and make a play out of it as well too. So Jamar Chase, best receiver in the league this year, gets the crown for sure.
I did find that stat for you, by the way. 3 players have over 200 targets, and they're all during 16-game seasons. It's Marvin Harrison, Calvin Johnson, and Julio Jones.
Really? Michael Thomas never got there? They had been really close.
Michael Thomas, 185.
Wow.
Man.
He has the reception record, I think, too. So that's pretty crazy. But
Merchant.
Maybe Malik Neighbors, who got, I think, 170 targets this year, will get more next year. So who knows? Sure. But moving on from that, on to the second half.
Yeah, for the second half here, I figured we didn't really need another mock draft this week. Let's just wait until we see the Senior Bowl. The Shrine Bowl, actually, they're going to start practicing this weekend. We know Shadir Sanders will be there. And whatever else happens until February, there could be some trades. So we can actually watch these guys with our eyes and, form some of our own opinions, because this is a very unique draft class. So I can't wait to watch some of them again. So we're going back to college football stuff real quick. The national championship was last night, of course, so we're officially in portal season. Here are a couple of moves you may have missed over the months. These are former really high prospects changing teams. We'll start off with Carson Beck. Probably more likely you've heard of this one. Pretty polarizing quarterback from Georgia last season. Didn't have the worst season when it comes to SEC quarterback play, but clearly not ready for the NFL. So he's going to take the advice of everyone, return to school for one more year at Miami, taking Cam Ward's spot. Interesting. Another quarterback, Fernando Mendoza, pretty good season at Cal for their first ACC season ever. He is not going to Miami anymore because of Carson Beck. Now it's going to be Indiana. That's a team that was in the playoff last year, a complete turnaround. Now they're going up from, Curtis Rourke, pretty good season out of the MAC, but we're talking about a real 4-star quarterback who played well in the ACC. Unlimited potential. We'll see. One more quarterback I have in this top 5, Air Noland. The Southpaw was the number 7 quarterback recruit in last year's class, but with Ohio State signing a 5-star Tavian St. Clair, playing time's no guarantee, he chooses to go to South Carolina, learn for a year from Lenora Sellers before eventually taking over. Interesting move, I thought we should mention there, because it's not going to happen yet, but it easily something you could forget. How about a future NFL edge rusher here in Patrick Payton? Not very happy with Florida State last season. He leaves for LSU to help him go on one more run with Garrett Nussmeier. I really hope that LSU has a good year. They're due for one. And the last guy I want to mention, Zachariah Branch, former USC five-star receiver, also very frustrated with the original team's performance over the past few years. So he goes to Georgia. Branch is going to be one of Georgia's biggest transfer gets ever, a weapon who has the NFL on his mind. They're just the top 5 guys so far. I expect things to get crazy now that there's no more games with NIL and, coaches revealing like, hey, fucking Oregon tried to steal my guy. I'm going to expose Oregon now, but no one really does anything about it. So we'll see what happens.
Transfer portal is crazy, man. And I think the biggest thing is that these are kids in the transfer portals will too. So they kind of act like kids when they're in it. Zachariah Branch was like the ultimate Twitter cryptic tweet guy for the last 2 months, where he just tweets an emoji or he tweets I'm upset or something like that. It's all fun and games when you're looking at it from an outsider's perspective like us, but it was kind of funny. Getting a whole bunch of Schefter tweets. Oh, just that the Cowboys interviewed Schottenheimer, but my watch blew up 3 times. It's
oh, hey, shit. He brought the Jets to the AFC Championship game. Hire him, guys.
Yeah, last time my watch blew up 3 times in a row, it was Ben Johnson going. So that tells you where I'm at. But moving on from that, though, we'll get into our Layups bowl predictions, which was a rough week, but it was an interesting week in football, and we had a whole bunch of good games, which was fun. I had Baltimore -1. Mark Andrews catches that. We'll never know. But obviously doesn't hit there. Skylar had Kansas City -8. That did hit. This week, I have Philly -6. I predicted it to be an 8-point game. I think they win by 8. So being over 6 should be good.
Yeah, a cautionary tale for all of my friends who are sports bettors, something that I've mentioned a couple times here. Kansas City -8 wasn't the line at game time, right? It went up to 9.5 and it didn't cover. So what I tell everyone who wants to know the tips and the tricks or whatever from the guys who bet on the podcast all the time, if you got a line you like, put it in on Tuesday night, man. That's why I'm taking Kansas City -2. We've already seen it change a little bit. I think if they win by a field goal, that'd be an awesome game and pretty good value for a home team that's won this game 3 years now.
Yeah. Last week, my not bold prediction was Buffalo-Baltimore under 51.5. Ended up being 52. If Mark Andrews caught that pass, then it would have been even worse. But that doesn't hit by 1 point, unfortunately. And Skylar had LA over Philly at +215. I kind of rubbed it in his face when it didn't hit, but obviously tough pick there. This week, I have Dallas Goedert touchdown, which I believe is at about +300, which is pretty good odds for a guy who Jalen Hurts has really liked in the past weeks as well, too. When he played in the game that they played for the first time, he had, I believe, 65 yards on 5 catches. I expect him to be a good red zone target for him this year, or not this year. Well, this year, but this game especially, and to get in the end zone here at that value is something I'd take.
For my bold prediction, I decided to go away from the championship games because I'd be shocked if we have anything too crazy happen, especially if there's bad weather, other than Kansas City getting bailed out. So how about some basketball? I got the Warriors over Sacramento on the road on Wednesday, and I understand that the wheels are literally about to fall off for the Warriors right now. Draymond's out, Kuminga's out. They're about to trade valuable pieces probably for more fucking second-round picks, but we'll see. Here's the thing, though. The Warriors play pretty well in Sacramento, usually stop the beam from being lit. Curry, you can tell the age, man. He doesn't have the same games that he used to, but once a week, he usually puts up a valiant effort in a crazy upset. And I'm going to say that Wednesday night that does happen. No lines up yet. I guess in basketball, you never really know who's playing, so they wait. But ESPN has the Warriors only at a 37% chance to win, maybe a +190 in that one if the Warriors win.
No. That's going to do it, though, for episode 228. Next week, 229. Probably won't talk Super Bowl. We'll talk a little bit of Super Bowl, but we won't give our full prediction. We'll go over all the Pro Bowl games, though, and who we think is going to win the skills challenges. No, just kidding on that one. But I mean, I have no clue what we're going to talk about next week. It's ways away. So I don't know. We'll find something though.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully we find coaches by then. That would be big, especially a good one that's not 73 years old. But anyways, any closing remarks, Skyler?
Congrats to Ichiro. Congrats to CC Sabathia, Billy Wagner, Dick Allen, Dave Parker. Always awesome to see multiple people getting in the same year, because we've lived through some years where no one gets voted for. And it's really annoying because there are more than 10 Hall of Famers on the ballot every year. You just got to send in your damn vote. Guys, come on.
And if you are the BBWWA or whatever the acronym is, if you're a writer for them and you did not vote for Ichiro, fuck you.
I'm on board with that. We'll see you guys next week.
Yeah.